A dream awoke Mariah, and an internal voice instructed her to go to the shore. The internal voice sounded like Granny Rose. Mariah promptly obeyed. So standing on the shore in the middle of the night, she felt she was crazy. But she looked towards the ocean and saw a floating dark object that the wave was bringing closer. She soon saw it was a man, but had no idea if he was dead or alive. She waded into the water, and it was so cold. Hello, Novels and Bets listener. It is good to have you here today. How are you doing? Oh gosh. Oh my God, it's a new week. And honestly, I'm excited today. I have no idea why I feel this way because I think I was so worried last week. I was having all these concerns about my future. Where is the next money coming from? Now we don't graduate school, so you're on your own. It's your life. You're running yourself and stuff. So, but I think I really listened to some, helpful resources that helped shift my thinking, and I found out that I was able to come out of that. These are resources that I'd like to keep around myself daily, but I have to admit that even today, I haven't listened to it yet, and today is already running late. But regardless, I will try to see something about it, journal and all that. I journaled a whole lot. Because I had so much on my mind. It really helped lighten me up. So whatever it is that's your practice for really kind of freeing yourself up, you feel good, you feel better when you carry these things out, please go for it. And also, I read a lot of novels. I completed 2 novels, in 3 or 4 days. Okay, I've been actually reading them before then, but I was like, woof, I'm in novel reading mode. Okay, let's run with this. So, that's really what's been up with me. And so anyhow, today we are starting a new story. And today's story is historical fiction. So today is Loving a Lost Lord by Mary Jo Putney. And I mentioned that we're going to have a historical fiction today. And today's one is awesome. If you see the show notes description of this episode, you know that you're in for a good treat. Okay, so without wasting further time, let's start. Okay, just one more thing before we start. Please, anywhere I listen to this podcast, just pause this podcast for a moment and rate it. Just rate it 5. And share your thoughts about it, what you've enjoyed about it, so that others can discover the podcast and our community can grow. And that, maybe I can start getting some clients and making one money or two from this. I'm just saying. Also, your reviews, I will start reading them on the podcast publicly and sharing social media handles of the person who wrote those reviews starting Thursday. I want all of my listeners, I want you, yes, you in particular, to gain traction from this podcast. You're just not listening to it for enjoyment. You also have a community who is also hearing and seeing you and knowing that you're part of us. So please share your reviews so that I can read it on the podcast and others can hear. Thank you so much. All right, that is all. I am done riffing. All right, so let's get into the story. Our story begins in Kent, 1812, 19th century again. On a late night, 3 gentlemen came to pay a visit to their former teacher, and she's a mother figure to them, Lady Agnes Westerfield. These 3 gentlemen were Alex Randall, James Kirkfield, and Will Masterson. Together with 3 other young men, these men made up Lady Agnes's first class of students. She termed them her lost lords who needed special care and education. These 6 boys became best friends and like brothers. They were all from wealthy homes and were all regarded as problematic. It was Lady Agnes, a duke's daughter who they married, that set up a school for them that gave them a place to belong. Now, they had all become men and faced different challenges. They were still close, but they all had their own lives to lead. And as it were, it led them to different places. One of them was lost in France, another was in Portugal, and the remaining 4 were in England. But one of them, one of the 4 who were in England, got into an accident that was reported to have claimed his life. And the remaining 3 gentlemen came to break the sad news to Lady Agnes. The one who was supposedly dead was Adam, Duke of Ashton. He was Lady Agnes's first student. Adam was the kind of person who made an oyster look chatty when it came to his personal life. He was such a private person, so the others didn't really know how he came to be Lady Agnes's first student. Throughout the story, I refer to Adam as both Adam and Ashton. Ashton is his title, and that's what everybody calls him. Nobody calls the Duke by his first name. Adam is his first name, and that's it. So she told them that night about it, like how Ashton came to become her first student. She had just returned from her travels because her father was sick. 3 months later, she was looking for a challenge to conquer and what to do. So one day, she was strolling through Hyde Park and encountered young Ashton in the trees with an ugly dog. His teacher at the time, a short man, was cursing at him from the ground. Apparently, Ashton had been a difficult boy to this teacher because his entire life had changed overnight. This boy was born and raised in India. His father was sent to India as a diplomat, but he'd met and fallen in love with an Indian princess and had gotten married and had Adam. When Adam was 10 years old, the title that his father was second in line to inherit came to him. His father never thought he would inherit that dukedom, so they were preparing to travel back to England when his father caught his sickness and he swiftly killed him. Young Adam became the Duke as a result, and they bundled him back to England, cutting him off so callously from his mom and the life he knew. No wonder he'd been so difficult to his teacher and refused to speak any English to the man, although he knew English. He'd adopted an ugly stray dog he'd named Banu, and he spent most of his time with the dog. His teacher had gotten mad and ordered the dog killed, but the groom couldn't do it and set the dog free into Hyde Park. When Adam learned of what happened, he went to the park and found the dog. Somehow, they both wound up on the tree, and that's where the teacher found them. Lady Agnes came upon them, and the teacher raved to Lady Agnes about how Adam was a wrong duke, and how the title should have gone to Adam's English cousin, and not some boy born of an Indian slut. Gosh, that man is damnable. How can you say that to the hearing of a kid? Lady Agnes saw how miserable young Adam looked and knew he understood the tutor's words and knew he wasn't loved. Like Adam knew he wasn't loved. So inspiration struck her then to create the Westerfield Academy. She claimed she owned a school for boys of good birth and bad behavior, even though it was just one in her mind, though, as of when she was talking, but she claimed the school already existed. And she claimed that she'd learned ancient methods of discipline during her travels. So Lady Agnes struck a bargain with the teacher that if she could get Adam down from the tree and get him to behave civilly, the teacher would recommend her at school to Adam's trustees. Of course, she chased the teacher out of earshot so that he won't learn of her so-called Asian methods now. And then she spoke the little Hindi she'd learned in India to young Adam, and he'd replied in perfect English. Her attempt to speak to him in Hindi worked. At least it showed that someone cared enough to want to connect to him based on who he is and not who they wanted him to be. And so that attempt worked, and he got down from the tree. So she struck another bargain with young Adam himself that if he came to her school, he could keep Banu, his dog, and continue to study mechanics. He'd started the mechanics studies with his father. In return, he would learn the studies and role of an Englishman. She'd found the rest of them in similar ways. By similar ways now, like that they were in a problematic situation and Lady Agnes came upon it and helped them out. And she also recruited a retired general with similar beliefs to hers, and they created a unique and successful school. So Adam's cousin Hal became the 8th Duke. The English cousin that was supposed to have the dukedom instead of Adam became the 8th Duke because they thought that Adam was dead. He was actually the one. This Hal guy was the one who informed Adam's friends of his demise. He was close to Adam and he was sad about his passing. Adam had died on his steam yacht, the Enterprise. That's what the name of the steam yacht, the Enterprise. And he died when he and his engineers went for a trial run and a boiler, because steam yachts then run on boilers, and those boilers can be tricky. So the boiler exploded, and the ship and everything caught fire, and four of the crew died. 4 survived, but they were severely injured. So there were 8 in the crew overall. And so that was what happened. So Will Masterson assumed that Adam was probably in the engine room when the boiler when it exploded, because Adam is a mechanics person. So he was like, okay, at least Adam's death must have been quick. Lady Agnes was unsettled, about the whole thing. She's like, but has Adam's body been found? They were like, not yet. So she kind of had hope and was like, he might be injured somewhere. You guys should go and find him. Just go find him, right? So the three friends were skeptical, but they banded up together and went in search of his body. At least, even if they didn't find their friend alive, they'd found out more about the accident, what actually happened. So now, introducing our female lead. 2 months before Adam's accident, Mariah Clark and her father Charles moved into Hartley Manor. It was located in Cumberland, northwest England. It was close to the Irish Sea and was lovely. It was an estate that her father had won in cards. It's not the best way to make a fortune, but her father was an honest player and he'd won the estate fair and square. He'd won it from a George Burke like that, a fellow from a wealthy home who was a bad gambler. So Maria was going to become Miss Clark of Hartley Manor. It was a grand honor for her, considering the life she led up to that point. Now, she had to start acting like a real young lady, like her imaginary twin sister, Sarah. Maria was an only child and she was often alone. To ease her loneliness, she created a perfect friend in her mind, Sarah. Maria was raised by her great-grandmother Rose, who had gypsy blood. After Granny Rose passed, Maria went everywhere with her father, and it was an erratic lifestyle, like not stable now. She told fortunes at village fairs to make some money. It was a skill she'd learned from her granny. Maria was good at reading people, so that's how she was able to put that reading people skills to good use by telling them fortunes and making some money. As Miss Maria of Hartley Manor, at 25 years old, fortune telling was in her past, and instead she pursued estate management, including understanding of the estate account books. Man, she has a good head on her shoulders, right? So her father Charles informed her that as soon as they were settled, he needed to travel for a few weeks to take care of some family business. Charles had been the black sheep of his family, like Maria's dad, and he was disowned by his father. So he was a very wild young man. He used to be a very wild young man, and he started maturing when Maria was born. So Charles felt he was in a good place now. Like, okay, at least I won this house. Some years have passed by. I'm more respectable. I can reconcile with my family. So Maria was excited at the prospect of having a family because she's just only had Granny Rose. Granny Rose died when she was 18, and it's just been her dad and her for how many years now. So the idea of more family was like, yay, I have more family. So she asked more about this family, but her father wouldn't say anymore. He didn't want to disappoint her if the family turned him away and still didn't receive him. So several weeks later, Charles had traveled, and Maria was efficiently restoring the manor to glory. George had left it in a bad way with poor maintenance, and Maria was improving it slowly every day. The work gave her purpose. Her father often wrote to her, and she wrote back. However, a week passed, and there was no word from him. She hoped it was nothing. Maria had her eyes on the vicar, Mr. Williams, the vicar in the village. He was single and the only attractive person around, or rather, the most suitable bachelor around, and Maria felt that he might be interested in her too. Maria also had a new friend close to her age, Mrs. Julia Bancroft. This Julia was the local midwife and local substitute physician since doctors weren't close by. Maria had knowledge of herbs that her Granny Rose had taught her, but she wasn't a natural healer like Julia, so she was happy to pass on Granny Rose's knowledge to her friend. One morning, Maria was informed that Judge Buck was looking for her. Remember the Judge Buck now, the person that gambled the house away to her father. The housekeeper, Mrs. Beckett, warned her to watch herself around him. George was a good-looking man in his early 30s. He came with bad news. Charles, Maria's father, was killed by highwaymen outside of London. George had been at a close-by inn and had identified her dad's body. As proof, he produced a gold ring with a Celtic design that her father often wore, like this particular ring like that. So it struck Maria that she was completely alone in the world. Her father hadn't made contact with his relatives yet at the time of his death, and there was no way Maria could reach them. All that was left was Hartley Manor. However, George claimed that Charles had cheated in the game and he'd been on his way to challenge him when he'd learned of his death. Maria was furious at George's claims. She knew her father knew how to cheat. He'd shown her how cheaters worked, but he told her often that a cheater was barred from playing with gentlemen when discovered. He had no reason to subject himself to such fate, not when he was an honest gambler and gambling was good business for him. Seeing that Maria was beautiful, George took another route. Like, okay, let's not make this girl destitute. Instead, that he now started saying, Dad, I've been prepared to go to the court to reclaim my estate, but that method is slow and expensive. But since you are orphaned and you're alone, why not marry me? I see that the household is flourishing under your leadership, and I'll protect you in return. Maria was so shocked. She couldn't imagine marrying a game star because he'd wreak havoc on her life with his gambling habits. She's seen it happen to many families. And George dared to say to Maria, he could see on her face that she was deliberating it. And George dared to say that there is even you that will benefit more from this offer, considering your murky origins as far you don't even have background compared to me. She would say, what now? Wow. So remembering that the housekeeper had warned her to be wary of him, because that Mrs. Beckett that warned her now. Maria now lied to George that she couldn't accept his offer because she already had a husband. George didn't believe her because no one in the village had mentioned any husband of hers. She explained that she was married to a distant cousin. I mean, they could do that in that time, marry their cousins. That she was married to a distant cousin who was also surnamed Clark. So she answered to both Miss or Mrs. Clark. Really quick on her feet and thinking. Luckily for Maria, she'd never flirted noticeably with that vicar she liked. So George was suspicious and asked where her husband was. She replied that he was yet to join her in Hartley. He was in the army, serving his country, unlike a certain person. Obviously, she's directing this soap to George, who gambled away his patrimony in a drunken stripper. George took in everything Maria said, and did as a challenge. He just kind of took everything she was in, like, oh, okay, I'm still going to get this girl, right? So he promised to return to see her later, but she preferred to never see him again. After George left, Mariah settled into grief. She knew she had to contact her father's London solicitor, who had handled the transfer of ownership for Hartley Manor, and carry out investigations. Charles' death just didn't seem real. Mariah felt knowing details of his demise, how he died, and then recovering his body to bury it in Hartley might make his passing seem more tangible. She thanked God that her father had left her a woman of means. At least he hadn't gone to die when they did not have anything. She would have been so destitute. At least now she had Hartley Manor to protect and all that. But it just hurt so much that her father died too young. He was just 50-something. She wept uncontrollably for him. The next day, Mariah received a letter from the London solicitor confirming Charles' death. That's fast. In the days that followed, George constantly came around and was on his best behavior. He was so polite and charming that Mariah felt she'd misjudged him at their first meeting. She was like, oh, maybe tensions were running high. Maybe he's not really mean, da-da-da. However, she felt his lust for her and reminded herself that if she married him because she was lonely, he was a gamester who would still likely gamble Hartley Manor from underneath her feet. He was too unreliable. Do you understand? Like, even if you're married this guy for security, how did you come to meet him? That he gambled away Manor that you now own, and he's coming to claim that he wants it back. He's likely that he'll still gamble it away one day. So you cannot depend on somebody like that. No. So George kept pestering Mariah. He even reminded her of lawsuits concerning the Manor and was trying to back her into a corner. Mariah knew if he kept this up, she would fall. She prayed for Granny Rose's guidance. Her Granny Rose had been a wise woman who could make herbal potions, read palms, and give white counsels. She'd perform rituals occasionally for specific reasons. She used to say that there was no magic involved in those rituals. Rather, the rituals were a form of meditation that helped the mind to focus on desire and goals. It was like praying using herbs. It was nighttime, and Mariah needed a good ritual. She couldn't sleep, and she was deeply bothered. She decided on a wishing spell where she could ask for whatever was best to solve her problems. So Mariah put on adequate clothing, collected a tinder box and lucky incense, and went outside towards the sea. She performed the ritual in an open gazebo, more like corridor that is outside. She prayed for help through this difficult time and for healing, protection, strength, and luck. She imagined a husband who fits her dreams, but quickly suppressed that image and just focused on asking for mental and emotional strength. She felt peaceful after praying and didn't know when she slept off. A dream awoke Mariah, and an internal voice instructed her to go to the show. The internal voice sounded like Granny Rose. Mariah promptly obeyed, and it felt as if she was in a magical, mystical world. So standing on the shore in the middle of the night, she felt she was crazy, but she looked towards the ocean and saw a floating dark object that the wave was bringing closer. She soon saw it was a man, but had no idea if he was dead or alive. She waded into the water, and it was so cold. Mariah was able to reach the man. His arms were locked around a large chunk of wood, and Mariah tiled the beam and the man ashore, bravely fighting the rough water the entire time. The man still had a heartbeat despite the injuries all over his body. Since he had dark hair and complexion, Mariah assumed that he was a foreign sailor. Remember, Adam is Indian and British, so he's dark and, he has foreigner looks. She turned him on his side when he started coughing out water. After that, she helped him get into a shabby room that an elderly housekeeper used to use. She opted for that room so that he wouldn't strain himself further by climbing the stairs. The room is on the ground floor. Mariah got the sailor, who we know is Adam, into a bed. She dried him off. She observed that his clothes were charred at the edges. He had massive bruises, cuts, and scrapes. There were areas of blistered and scorched flesh, but they weren't severe. Mariah suspected a ship's fire and thought that he must have dived into water immediately. That's why he's not too injured. Mariah wrapped him with layers of blankets and warmed the room up with fire. She went to her room to change into dry clothing. Then she proceeded to the kitchen to boil broth and water for tea. She brought some water for him to drink and noticed he hadn't shaved for days. That meant he'd been in the water for a long time. She thought he was so strong to have survived. Man, how did he do it? He looked to be around 30 years and he was lean, well-muscled, and had calloused hands. I like the fact that he's not broad-chested, just that normal, lean, muscular man, like a working man, Abby. So it's easy to assume he's a sailor. There was some hair matted on the left side of his head. So Mariah had to investigate it, and she discovered that, he had a head injury. For that reason, she quickly sent for Julia, that's her friend now, that is a local substitute of local physician. As she pulled up the blankets, Adam woke up, and Mariah was stunned by his green eyes. Mariah was a brown-eyed, golden-haired woman with a perfect oval face. Her hair was flowing freely down, so Adam reached for it. It was silky to touch. So Mariah tied back the hair so it wouldn't get in her face, and Adam regarded that simple action as graceful. It's ironic, because Mariah thinks she lacks grace, but as Adam is watching her, he's like, oh my gosh, I don't know who this woman is, but everything she's doing is so graceful. Mariah asked for his name after he drank water, but he couldn't remember, and panic seized him when he realized he had no memory of his name, no place, no past, and no idea what he looked like. Mariah saw his fear and asked, have you forgotten that I'm your wife? Bam! That news lightened Adam's panic, along with the reassurance that someone was coming to treat his head wound, and he remembered everything about himself by the next day. She had to reassure him, don't worry, that I'm your wife. So Adam was just like calmer, like, oh, at least the person taking care of me, someone I know. And then she was like, don't worry, I've called for somebody to treat your wound, and you would remember yourself soon. Don't worry, it's okay. So later on, when he was observing the objects in the room, he realized that he knew what these objects, like bed, table, vase, stuff like that. He realized that he knew what they were called in a different language other than English, but he didn't know what that other language was. He felt afraid. We know that other language is Hindi, obviously, because he can speak Hindi. He felt afraid, vulnerable, and helpless. He felt this wasn't the first time he was torn away, because the first time he was torn away was that time they withdrew him from India and from his family and everybody now. So he just had that same feeling that this is not the first time I'm experiencing something like this, being turned away from a life I knew and planted into a different existence. And that made him all the more afraid. Mariah felt that crossing paths with Adam wasn't by accident. She'd performed a wishing ritual, heard her Granny Rose instruct her to run to the shore, and she could swear it was Granny Rose who burst out the words that she was Adam's wife. Intuition had guided her well in life, and she believed this was an opportunity to acquire a pretend husband that she could use to send George Burke packing. Also, pretending to be Adam's wife brought him reassurance. She saw that in his eyes. So it's like a win-win situation for both of them. If he never recalled his memories, she planned to tell him eventually that they weren't married. But if he did remember, soon enough, she would explain that she'd lied about being his wife, so he didn't feel alone or burdened by her help. Because if she had to tell him at that point, oh, I'm not your wife, I'm not anybody, obviously he would not really want to stay so long to fully recover. He'd be like, oh, I have to leave you, I'm probably encroaching on your kindness. But obviously by saying she's his wife, he is more inclined to accept her help. So when Adam was told his name was Adam, it felt right, because it's his real name. And to think that Mariah had just come up with the name, because he's like, oh, first man, okay. He had good manners and spoke well, so it made Mariah guess that he must have received quality education in England, despite his foreign appearance. When Adam lamented that others would know more about his life than he did, Mariah was like, don't worry, we're in a new place, no one knows you just arrived. So he learned her father was dead and quickly offered sympathy. So Mariah had to explain that they'd known each other briefly before getting married. They were distant cousins and had the same last name. She the lie that she told George, she tallied it. That's what she did here. Mariah asked how long Adam was adrift, like in the ocean, and he said that he remembered 2 nights and dawns. Uncle was in ocean 2 nights and 2... Jesus. Since he knew the cold was deadly, how he had to slow his breathing and retreat to a quiet corner of his mind to preserve himself. This is some spiritual practice that saved him here. Adam had to ask Mariah, but why was I at the sea in the first place? She was like, oh, you were coming to join me from the continent, and, we're coming here to Hartley, and you must have been shipwrecked towards the end of your journey, So Julia arrived, and after inspecting Adam's head wound and discovering the rules Mariah put up as his wife, she cooperated. She understood why Mariah lied to Adam, but she explored other possibilities that included Adam not ever recalling his former life, his attachment to her, like he's literally attached to Mariah is the only thing he knows, right? And what if he wanted to claim his marital rights? Mariah replied, if he never regained his memories, they could marry, and that solved the problem. She liked Adam already. But Julia pointed out that he may already have a wife and children. Mariah hadn't considered that. Julia assured her that since Adam's head wound wasn't severe, since he could speak coherently and reason, that he could actually regain his memories soon. Mariah gave Adam her father's clothes to wear. They were of similar size and build, fortunately. While Adam was sleeping, George came around, and this time his patience ran out, and he wanted to force himself on Mariah, so she'd have no choice but to marry him, as the one who compromised her. Scheming bastard. Mariah fought him, but she was no match. Out of the blue, Adam appeared because, he could hear furniture and everything, and then he flung George across the room like it was nothing, like it was a bag of potatoes. It happened so fast that George was in shock. And then Adam warned George to never come near Mariah again. George apologized. He left town that day, that morning. It was noticeable that he had mentioned no lawsuit. And Mariah was like, could that have been an empty threat all along? Adam was exhausted after the confrontation with George because he still had much recovering to do. Mariah asked, how are you even able to fling George that way? And Adam replied that he knew how to use a man's size and weight against him. It's something he intuitively knew. So Mariah was like, okay, so this guy can fight. Okay, that explains his workman's hands. Like, workmen know how to fight. But then it doesn't explain his cultured speech. He just amazed her. He was an enigma. Since he wasn't willing to return to sleep yet, they talked. She sat on the chair in the parlor there, and they talked. He asked how her father came to win the estate. Maria explained that her father had supported, she told him that he won this, but fair and square. Then she now explained that her father had been traveling. Her father had been supporting them by them going from one house party to the next. He was a charming guest, a good sportsman, never a burden. His card playing kept them comfortable, and the reason he was able to win this house from George was that this George guy is not a good player. So Adam was informed that he was in Cumberland, because he was like, hold on, which part of England are we? So she's like, Cumberland. Then, there was a map of Britain there. He could point out where Cumberland was on the map. So he knew he was British, but at the same time, because when she was like, so does that mean you're British? She's like, I think I'm British, but at the same time, I think I am not British. Like, yes and no. Mariah hoped he remembered quicker, especially now that George was no longer in the picture. Like, he had played the part she wanted him to play, and she just hoped he remembered who he was for his sake. She didn't want to destabilize him by telling him she was not his wife. That lie was holding him together, so she couldn't discontinue it yet. Mariah told Adam about herself because he asked. She told him that she didn't know her family roots because her father wouldn't talk about his past. She knew her father well, but nothing else, including where he was born, how he met her mother, how her mother died. She didn't know all those things. Adam asked why her dad wouldn't talk about his past. Mariah replied that she thought her father was born into a gentry family, like an aristocratic family, but he was cut off because of bad behavior. Her father was barely 20 when she was born and lost her mother when she was about 2 years old. She didn't remember her mother. She lived with Granny Rose. Her father visited often, and they had the loveliest Christmas holidays. Mariah told Adam about Granny Rose. She wanted to be truthful in other aspects, and she told a big lie about being his wife. So she was actually telling the guy the real truth about herself. She explained to him that Granny Rose was half gypsy and was a village midwife and healer. She got her eyes from Granny Rose, who said that gypsy blood made the women in their family irresistible. Mariah thought the blood had thinned in her, like she's not as irresistible. But then Adam said, no, it hasn't thinned in you at all. Like with this, conviction that just sweeps a girl off her feet. Come on. So Granny Rose died when Mariah was 18 years old. Mariah told Adam about George's accusations of her father and how he'd proposed marriage to prevent a lawsuit. She was mad that he thought she needed a man to take charge of Hartley Manor, that she could manage the account books better than George, and she could learn about agriculture. Adam said that when he was stronger, he would take over the agricultural part. And Mariah was startled at his audacity to propose managing her estate. Like, he didn't even ask, can I? He just said, I will do it. But then she recalled English law that married women's properties belong to their husbands. This was another drawback of lying that you're married, because the guy would literally, take charge of her possession, like the house, as though it's his own. Not like he did it in a bad way, but obviously the man of the house is supposed to still be the man of the house. You understand? And she has to just submit or else her lie will come out. Adam added that he felt he had farming experience. She said she'd show him around the manor once he recovered to test that understanding. She accompanied him back to his room to rest. He invited her to lie beside him until he fell asleep. It was an innocuous request if you consider the fact that they're married, but it will be shocking. Like, it's actually a very shocking thing, if he were to learn they're not married and this girl is lying with you. It's, scandalous. As it turned out, it was Mariah who slept first because she was exhausted from a long night. She's been awake since now, both rescuing him, putting him to sleep, dealing with George, all those things. So she's even the one that slept first. Adam took his time to admire his wife in quotes and wished for strength so he could carry out his husbandly duties. Already. He also wished to remember their non-existent love story. Regardless, he was willing to make new memories with her. Meanwhile, Adam's friends started their search in the city where the explosion happened. Glasgow is a Scottish part of United Kingdom. So they found Adam's shipyard, and by morning, Kirkland had the address of the chief engineer of the Enterprise, Adam's yacht. So the chief engineer was Archibald McTavish. He was on the yacht, and he had lost his right arm. So this is a survival, but the man did not even remember his right arm going off, smashing. He was recovering and miserable. So Adam's friends wanted to find out the site of the explosion, so they could go to the water and find his body, like Adam's body, taken home for burial. They also asked if he knew what caused the explosion. The poor man didn't. So he said that everything had been fine. The ship, the trial run had gone as it was supposed to. Archibald didn't know where Adam was. They will now also ask questions like, oh, did you know when Adam was at the time of the explosion? Archibald didn't know. All right, let's call him McTavish, didn't know. He assumed Adam was in the engine room, just like Will had assumed too now, because he's spent a lot of time there. So it was a pilot who was an ace swimmer that had helped McTavish to show, because when it happened, everything was so sudden. So it was the pilot that jumped into the water and helped McTavish get to the shore. So they also learned that there were 2 other survivors, right? So 4 survivors in total from that explosion. So there were a crew of 8, 4 survivors, 4 casualties, according to Archibald. As for a body washing ashore, there were 1,000 places a body could end up. When they're like, do you think his body... So they're like 1,000 small islands around here. Finally, Randall asked if there was a chance of retrieving the Enterprise from the sea. Archibald recommended a Jamie Bogle salvage ship and crew for the task to retrieve the yacht and see if they could find out anything more about the accident. And, he too wanted to see the salvage of the Enterprise to find out why it had exploded, because everything had been fine. Before they left Archibald's house, Kirkland, like one of the lots now, these guys are all wealthy, aristocratic guys. So he offered Archibald an engineering job at his prominent uncle's shipyard. He knew that Archibald's family. He knew that Archibald's family needed money, and they felt hopeless because the man of the house had lost his hand. He asked about the names of the other survivors and where they could be found. Archibald happily relayed information to him. Of course he would happily, because now, at the time these guys came, he was miserable, no hope of a future. Now these guys came and said, you don't need to have your hand for my uncle to hire you. And the truth is, Kirkland's uncle is actually not looking for new hires, but Kirkland will create a job for Archibald and they'll be paying him. So that's really good, about money and influence. Meanwhile, Adam started having dreams of, he started dreaming of his memories, and we can know where that is going to lead him to and stuff like that. So on the next, I feel like I've talked enough, but at least I've given us a background to this story, right? We've learned about Adam, we've learned about where he's coming from, the explosion, now he's met this woman, and, a love story is going to blossom from there and all of that. So this is where we end this podcast for today. So we want to find out, of course his friends would find him, but what else is there to this accident? Do you understand? And also, Maria, how would Adam react when he finds out that, Maria has been lying to him? And also, is Adam actually entangled with anybody? We want to find out all those things. And honestly, that story is so beautiful, because at the point the story started, both of them don't have anybody in the world. Both of them don't have any family. So they kind of banded up together. And then there were all these things against them. They were even separate for a while. So you want to catch the rest of the gist. And we are going to complete it on Thursday. Don't miss it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Please rate, review. God bless you. All right. I love you so much, Nobels and Big Listener, and I really appreciate your time. Bye.